Good morning. I'm delighted to welcome so many of you to our webinar today. There are over 500 people registered for this webinar, and currently we've got over 300 people and climbing that are logging in. We'll keep fingers crossed that our domestic IT systems behave, but if yours doesn't, please don't stress. We will be sending out a recording together with resources, a checklist, and any questions after the webinar. On the call today, we have myself, and I'm Head of Consultancy at the Cranfield Trust. We have Jane Kendall, who is our Project Manager for Wales, and of course the most important person, Steve Hodgson, highly skilled professional and volunteer for the Cranfield Trust, giving his time for free for today's webinar, and he will be presenting the material. Because there are so many people on today's webinar, we now have nearly 400 coming up, then what we will do is we will leave questions and answers to the end of the webinar. There will be time for questions and answers, and please post them in the chat, and I will pose them to Steve. So thank you all very much, and I will pass the baton now to Jane, who will introduce the Cranfield Trust and the webinar.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today, and it's amazing to have such a great response to this webinar. So thank you for your time. As Alice said, I'm Project Manager in Wales. I've been working for the Trust for the past couple of years. And the Cranfield Trust, and if you haven't worked with us before, we are one of the leading charities delivering pro bono support in the UK. We've been supporting charities for over 30 years and are uniquely placed to be able to help your charity during this unprecedented time. Whether you need short-term, practical advice or longer-term management support, we're here for you. We are here for you during COVID-19 crisis and beyond to help your charity thrive. We have a range of services available to you. Our remit is that we work with charities who focus on poverty, disability and social exclusion. We are running some new programs. We have one starting next week, which is a peer-to-peer exchange. This is a new program of support that we are offering charity leaders. So we will have between 6 to 8 charity leaders attending a forum. At each session, we will enable individuals to share their own knowledge and experience on some of the critical issues they're facing at the moment, to get support really from other like-minded individuals in potentially the same sort of situation. So it's a program of support that will start next week. At the end of this webinar, Alice will be inviting you all to share your thoughts via a short survey. The survey will give you the option to express an interest in attending our series of peer-to-peer sessions, and it will also give you the opportunity to register for one of our services. So just to go through some of those services with you, Cranfield Trust On Call is a telephone advice support service that is proving extremely popular at the moment. Many charity leaders are feeling isolated right now. They're faced with critical issues and they really don't know where to turn to for advice and support. Cranfield On Call will give you an opportunity to talk to a volunteer in complete confidence. Your call will last for approximately 1 hour. Some of our calls are also then supported with a couple of emails, but it's a really, really useful service and it's completely free to charities who meet our remit. So please go onto our website, cranfieldtrust.org, to find out more about how you can actually set up a call with a volunteer. HRNet is another service that is currently providing a lifeline to charities and social enterprises without the expense. So HRNet offers specific advice as well as a regular briefing on employment issues. It's completely free to join whatever your remit. So again, please, I would urge you to take or to become a member of HRNet. It's a very, very useful service at this moment in time. We've also got on our website lots of links to resources and guidance, free practical business resources. We also are running many sort of free to attend webinars. If there are any specific topics that you really feel you want to find out more about, please do take the opportunity when you complete our short sort of survey later to just let us know. Let us know what are the burning issues that you would really like us to focus on in future webinars. As well as obviously all of those services, we have our longer term support, and we are covering well, management consultancy projects. So you will have a volunteer working with you for anything from 3 to 15 days, depending on the nature of your you know, your specific issue. We cover charity governance and building an effective trustee board, strategy development, business planning, recovery planning is becoming more and more popular, developing financial information for business planning, marketing communications, organizational structure, mergers and collaborative working, again, really popular at the moment. And we're also offering insolvency advice as well. And what is a service that we are finding extremely valuable at the moment is our Cranfield Trust mentoring support. It's a really powerful tool for charity leaders looking to develop personally and professionally. So whether, you know, if you're looking to advance your career or grow your skills as a leader, a mentoring partnership can be a really rewarding and beneficial experience. So I would urge you to, again, consider mentoring support. Steve, I'm not going to keep you waiting. Steve has been a volunteer in Wales for the past 2 years. He was one of the first volunteers we recruited. He has been fantastic support to me and has helped a lot of charities in Wales, and he's also delivered some masterclass events for us. So really excited to listen to you, Steve, and thank you so much for your support. And we'll hand over to Steve.
Thank you, Jane. Good morning, everybody. So a little bit about me before we start. As well as a volunteer from the Cranfield Trust, I currently work as a consultant in the business continuity world for Clearview Continuity. Previously, I ran my own consulting business and spent 30 years in various global, European, and UK executive and management roles working for IBM. I have a particular interest in change within organizations, mentoring and coaching, as well as cyber and business resilience. I'm also a trustee at 2 charities and act as a lay representative at a strategic health authority here in Wales. Before I start through the charts, there are a couple of comments I'd like to make to give context to the next 40 minutes or so. I will spend most of the time talking about some practical suggestions for you to think through with regards bringing your staff, volunteers, beneficiaries and customers back to physical places of work or contact. I will, however, also spend a little time broadening the discussion to include asking you to think about what has changed and what needs to change in terms of your services and methods of delivery. These have been, you know, as there's been an impact on actually what you will do when reopening, or as in many cases, even restarting. I would also like to highlight that there is a lot of great guidance already in the public domain, although it can sometimes be a challenge to work through to it. But there's information such as working safely during this pandemic, social distancing at work, cleaning routines, and many other areas. I've used content from bodies such as the Health and Safety Executive, Public Health England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, advice from UK and devolved governments, unions, various NHS bodies, the World Health Organization, from the US, the CDC, and industry experts and consulting firms to develop the content of this webinar, and also the checklist that will be available after the session that Alice alluded to. I've also added a slide with some links at the end of this pack that are fairly useful to get direct access into some of those other areas. To give an example of what is available, the next few minutes are taken directly from the gov.uk coronavirus guidance and support web pages. They give 5 steps to working safely. The first item directs you to, and in quotes, make sure you read all the guides relevant to your workplace. Each guide has specific actions for businesses to take based on these steps. Further guidance will be published as more businesses are able to open. It then goes on to cover the 5 steps, and these are: 1, carry out a COVID-19 risk assessment. The text then goes to say, before restarting work, you should ensure the safety of your workplace by carrying out a risk assessment in line with the HSE guidance, consulting with your workers or trade unions, sharing the results of the risk assessment with your workforce and on your website. Then 2, develop cleaning, hand washing and hygiene procedures. You should increase the frequency of hand washing and surface cleaning by encouraging people to follow the guidance on hand washing and hygiene, providing hand sanitizer around the workplace in addition to washrooms, frequently cleaning and disinfecting objects and surfaces that are touched regularly, enhancing cleaning for busy areas, setting clear use and cleaning guidance for toilets, providing hand drying facilities, either paper towels or electrical dryers, followed by 3, help people to work from home, and then there's a list. Then 4, maintain 2-meter social distancing where possible, and then there's a list. And 5, where people cannot be 2 meters apart, manage transmission risks. That's 5 steps on the gov.uk website. It applies in England. In Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, whilst the steps and recommendations all aim to protect the workforce, be aware that there may well be differences in the advice and laws. So as I said, that was an example, and my intention is to try and build on that example throughout this session. Okay, so let's go in. We have a pretty simple agenda. The bulk of our time will be spent in the 3rd part, and I hope we'll have time for questions or a discussion at the end. I would also note that much of what I will cover will be in the form of a question to you. Do you, will you, should you, how do you, etc. So, it depends. It's an answer which has been constantly springing to mind as I've had discussions with clients and colleagues over the last few weeks and months. But why does it depend? Alice, could you move to the next chart, please? Thank you. So, partially it depends because of where your organization is today. Have you paused some services? Have you shut down? Are you running minimal operations from the office or site? Is everyone working from home or only paid staff? Are volunteers active or paused? Are you operating as normal? And then it depends on what you are going to do next and your plan to resume or restart. Alex, if you could just drop back to the previous chart, please. Thank you. We know that this virus does not respect boundaries, and the impact and rules, laws and guidelines could be different in different parts of the UK, as I've already indicated. You could have 4 locations, 1 in each of Wales, England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, but the rules may well be different in each. So how do you manage that complexity? One size does not fit all. So in my view, there is no single playbook or solution for getting back to normal. But I hope that this session will give you food for thought that can then be interpreted and applied in your context. One question you can be asking yourselves is this: do you need to trailblaze? Is there a rush to return to as it was before February and March? There are many examples of organizations that have had to adapt and change quickly, but they now find themselves asking whether reverting, some might say going back to normal, whether that is in fact the right thing to do. But, and this is an interesting point, what is normal anyway? Alice, if you could go to the next chart, please. Thank you. I think that what has become ever increasingly clear over the last few weeks is that whatever we thought would happen as we emerge from lockdown probably needs some adjustment. For sure, this will not be a binary or off to on action. And the challenge we all face is how we plot a path through the uncertainty that will prevail for some time. None of us know what is going to happen over the coming months or even years, but preparing and planning with a view to being flexible and agile in response to changing circumstances and restrictions driven by the pandemic must be key in bringing some certainty to how we provide the support and benefits of this sector to the population and society. We have seen the rapid increase in testing and testing capacity, giving us all a more robust support system, as well as the rapid development and trials of treatments and vaccines. Each of these has a central role to play in moving us to the next and subsequent phases. Could you move to the next chart, please, Alice? Thank you. Excuse me. What is also becoming clear is the view that there will be even deeper focus on personal responsibility around how we manage and maintain personal hygiene and social distancing. There are questions yet to be answered as to the impact of COVID-19 to previous societal norms in these areas. As the guidance has been changing over the last week or so, and lockdown and guidance has been easing at different rates in each country, there are clearly questions to be asked and answered with regards to the workplace. My recommendation would be to refer back to your own risk assessments for your workplace and workforce. Adjust them as appropriate and necessary, but be clear on how the assessment is carried out and any reasons for change. Keep clear and open communication with staff so that all understand how adjustments are being made. There's a clear opinion that contact tracing and the use of technology combined with fast action related to quarantining is going to continue to grow in importance, subject, of course, to society accepting the use of such methods and technology and its adherence and adoption at high enough levels. To show how rapidly we are changing, it was only last weekend that as I was thinking through the comments to make on the last bullet here, by Monday that commentary had changed as guidance in England and Wales was modified. So I think that there will be many new and interim normals over the coming months, but practically, what areas should we be thinking of as we reopen? Next chart, please. Thank you. So let's move to the meat of the discussion and think about some of the key areas. Next chart, please, Alice. Thank you. The next part of the discussion is going to focus on discussing some of the considerations to be made as we bring contact back into the working day. The content related to in the next charts is set out in the handout from Cranfield Trust in a checklist format to be used as a memory jogger or tool to initiate your thinking on areas applicable to your charity, your workforce, volunteers and beneficiaries, your visitors, customers and clients. It should be used to serve as an added resource to those trusted bodies' guidance I referred to earlier, so government, public health, etc. I'll touch on 4 key areas and we'll move to those now. So next chart, please, Alice. Your beneficiaries, clients, customers. So thinking about your charity, who or how do you serve and support? As you enter this new or interim new normal, which of your products or services are going to be in demand? Do you need to open up additional capacity to meet increased demand in one area, and at the same time, do you need to reduce or slow down elsewhere? What is it your beneficiaries or funders are expecting of you? As you do open back up, where and how will you interact with visitors, clients, customers, or suppliers? How do you deal with public access points to your locations? Do you restrict access? And if so, how? All of the public bodies I've referenced continue to emphasize the need to maintain physical distancing. So it remains really critical that as you reopen, you understand how you can reasonably maintain a safe distance following the appropriate guidelines. Are there lessons to be learned from retail, for example? I mean, we probably all queued to get into the local supermarket, where they've remained open during this period, particularly their use of protective screens, customer routing, access restrictions, and other initiatives. How do you deal with public areas, such as a waiting room? Do you mark out socially distant spacing? Reduce the number of chairs or seats? Restrict the number allowed in the building or room at one time? Provide alcohol-based hand sanitizer on entry? How often do you clean that public area? Who does that cleaning and when? How do you deal with the waste? What about meeting or interview rooms where staff would meet a member of the public? Should you operate a system of, say, red and green, red being the room has not been cleaned after use and cannot be used, green being it has been cleaned to the standards you have set out and is ready to be used again? Do you provide visitors PPE? Aligning how you think of how people visit your sites and locations with your policies and processes connected to facilities operations could be a prudent way forwards. It's also key that you set out clear expectations of how you and your staff and colleagues interact with visitors, and that your visitors have a clear understanding of your expectations of them. Ask yourself what that communication looks like. How is it disseminated, both internally and externally? Regular communications providing clear updates on the status of the charity and its locations, methods of contact, as well as any procedures and processes to be used will remain crucial for some time to come. A further area to consider, especially as lockdown relaxes, are industry and customer events. Are they still appropriate, or even still are they on? Do you have plans for holding or attending any? Have you reviewed timing and method of delivery? Should they be postponed or possibly virtualized? As I mentioned earlier, it may well be that you do not need to be a first mover or trailblazer to continue or to open. Does being first warrant the risk? With that, let's move to workforce. Next chart, please, Alice. Thank you. Talk a little bit about policy and management. As we re-emerge into the new or interim normal, it's worthwhile testing whether your policies and application of those policies has been effective for the workforce, paid and voluntary, as well as the organisation. Take a look at your sickness policies. Have they supported the organisation and workforce over the last months? Are there areas which need review and possible change? Certainly, there will be a need to reaffirm caution to the workforce. What no one needs in this climate is sickness heroes. And that may also need a cultural shift in the organisation. Do you know if that's the case? It would also be prudent to work through your policy and response should someone fall ill at site. Are there changes to how you respond? And are they clearly understood in the organisation? Have you trained your first aiders to respond differently? If and when a vaccine becomes available, will there be a policy regarding its use in the workforce? How would that operate? And what would your position be when thinking about the anti-vax movement? As seems more likely in the short term, a more freely available antibody test will be available. What will be your policy on testing and privacy with respect to any results? Thinking on holiday status, reviewing the position across the organisation and taking steps to clarify the position of holiday entitlement across the organisation is going to be important. Look at your carry forward policy and how you will meet your organisation needs, the employee need and government policy position. Are there differences for anyone who may have been furloughed? Some organisations have an attendance bonus policy and payment. In the circumstances of this pandemic, does that policy drive the right behaviour outcome? Should it be revisited? What about travel to and from work or for the needs of the organisation and the services provided? Will you provide PPE? What will be the guidance regarding use of public transport? Will you reimburse any excess costs of travel? Do you have safe commuting guidelines for your staff? Does your existing policy suffice, or is there a need for it to be revisited? How do you ensure social distancing for your staff when they are travelling, say on a train with a booked ticket? Given the discussion over the last few days regarding quarantine and flights, what do you do if your employee travels out of country for work or, say, holiday? Will you have a return to work quarantine policy? Will it differ to government guidelines and instructions? There are others for sure, but one final to think on. If staff have been furloughed or on reduced pay, how do you unwind those provisions? Next chart, please, Alice. Thank you. We've already seen in many countries and across multiple industries and sectors, businesses making challenging decisions that affect the workforce. In my view, this is going to continue, and focusing on right sizing, there are questions of who, what, and when. Note in this context, right sizing means flexing the workforce both or either of up and down. Who does the organisation need, with what skills, in which roles, and when will they be needed? Think back to the customer, product, service discussion a little earlier. Has your organisation changed such that the skills mix and staff size must be adjusted? What are the priorities of the organisation? Have they changed? And does that mean a change in the workforce mix is needed? Viewing the workforce and its priorities from yesterday, does the business need to rebalance and reallocate skills throughout its organisation structure? How is this being managed? Who's leading? Based on what data, decisions, and demands? Only yesterday, we heard Boris Johnson comment that there may well be a significant number of job losses following this pandemic. Whilst none of us want that to be the case, it could well mean that there are many highly motivated and skilled individuals looking for roles. Is this an opportunity to enhance your workforce or add skills to your trustee boards? As most will know, in many cases, organisations may have released contractors as an immediate reaction to the crisis. Ask, are those same or other contractors now needed as the organisation accelerates into a new normal? Is there competition for those skills that was not there before, and how will you deal with that? So what about staff or workforce well-being? Next chart, please, Alex. Thank you. As we know, throughout the last few months, there has been a huge focus on the well-being of friends, families and colleagues, and understandably so. As we start easing back into the next stage of this pandemic, that focus will and should continue. Having an employee assistance scheme available has proven its value over time, and revisiting the scale and scope or whether your organisation provides access to one is a valuable exercise. It has also been widely reported, and I'm sure as many on this call will recognise, given the role you play, mental health has had a lot of focus and will continue to do so. We will all need to be mindful of our own, our friends, families and colleagues, and for the organisation. Having or providing support for increased anxiety, return to the office concerns, and the impact of the virus on different groups should be part of the thinking and support structure being deployed or developed. There are many resources available for mental health support. Just two examples are Every Mind Matters on the NHS UK website and Looking After Your Mental Health During Coronavirus Outbreak from Mental Health Foundation. There are many, many more. We have seen in the news over the last few months how testing has been developed across our geography and elsewhere. It may be that additional testing will be appropriate at a local level or in your organisation. Examples of how you may decide to provide support to your staff could include screening or telemedicine support. You may decide to screen for temperature at site, or as time passes, even provide on-site COVID-19 testing. If you do decide on screening tests before entering premises, how will you do that? And are there privacy and safeguarding concerns? With the policies you implement, how do you ensure staff are supported if they feel other colleagues are not, for example, abiding by social distancing requirements? Is there a need for additional training for managers or a change to include open door policies? What about staff who become unwell at work? What policies and procedures need to be changed and adjusted? What do you need to do in a location or building to manage an unwell colleague? Absolutely review government, public health and NHS guidance and recommendations in the first place. Do you move that staff member to an isolation room if they are unable to leave the premises immediately? What are the cleaning protocols you should use, addressing where that person has been sitting and the immediate vicinity? Should you evacuate the site and not return until there has been a deep clean? How do you ensure a test is taken and that the test and trace process is followed? What happens if there is a positive test, and how do you react to changing any changed working practices already instigated? Do you close back down during the period of isolation? Given what happened yesterday in the Houses of Parliament when Alok Sharma fell ill, the reactions of MPs and others and actions taken in the chamber and elsewhere are interesting. As an aside, whilst we're discussing a return and reopening, what are the triggers for your response if there is a reinfection? Have you reviewed your business continuity and pandemic plan? What worked well? What didn't, and what lessons have been learned? What adjustments now need to be made? Sadly, many people will have suffered a loss of a loved one, friend, family member, or colleague during this time. If this affects one of your team, having the right support in place, perhaps through employee assistance schemes, and recognizing and remembering remains crucial. Again, there are many resources available and bereavement support groups and advice are there. Be prepared and utilize the support that is available across the network. Much has been said about PPE over the last few months, and I have no intention on making any remarks with regard to supply, other than to note that your supply chain and understanding your supplier's supplier has been really highlighted as a key need to know over the last few months. It is a valuable exercise to understand how, in detail, your supply chain functions and whether it is as robust as you need for your organization. What has become evident, however, is that perhaps what has been previously seen by an organization as a non-essential product actually is critical. So take, for example, as we return to offices and workplaces, the need for hand sanitizer, face masks, and/or gloves. before the pandemic, were these seen as critical resources in your supply cupboards and supply chain, and are they now? If they are, do you have sufficient stock? What is sufficient stock, and where or how do you access additional stock as supplies dwindle? Thinking about staff returning to offices and workplace, do you supply that PPE, or are you asking your staff to do it themselves? How do you ensure quality and the right type based on the current government or regulatory body guidelines? Do you send a care package out to your staff before they come back to work? What does that look like? What will be your on-site requirements, not just for staff, but also for visitors and clients? What about hand sanitizer and wipes? Where are they placed? And how do you deal with any waste, as I've said previously? Do you need to do anything differently with waste bins and the removal of used PPE? Do you need to treat that waste differently, and if so, how? Check the guidelines. Is it clear what your policy is, and is guidance accessible for all? I'll talk about communication shortly. Okay, so continuing the workforce discussion, we also need to think about our location strategies. Alice, could you move to the next chart, please? Thank you. If I think back to my "it depends" comment at the start, how do policies need to address working across different geographies, in our case, countries here, locations and location types? For example, will there be a need for guidance and advice for the use of PPE by the workforce that is specific to an office site but different for a call centre, a shop or a workshop environment? Certainly the four governments have differentiated sectors and business types and provided guidance specific in those areas. Thinking about how you operate, do you have critical process teams which can be split at a site or across sites if you have multiple sites and locations, allowing for protection against a whole team becoming ill or needing to isolate, and therefore protecting that critical process as you restart? If one group is exposed, the others can continue. Once you have identified what work is restarting and where, you'll also need to think about and identify what resource, both human and other, that is needed to make that work happen at the site, and then start addressing what that means to people. Do you build a changed work schedule, say alternate days in or from home? Can you do that by team, blue team, green team, with one in, one out, almost like a home and away team model? What about staggered shifts? Is that feasible or sensible? How can you phase return? Is the site able to cope with the necessary social and physical distancing measures? If it is, what does that do to physical capacity at the site? Do you start with facilities and IT staff and phasing their return, allowing for the appropriate checks on the building, heating, ventilation, water systems, aircon and IT systems? As you set up the location for restart, do you create a ready team that owns the actions related to signage or rearranging workstations, for example? What do you do to coordinate with building managers and other tenants, if there are any? Who does that, and how do you reach agreements, for example, in common areas? One implication of the many staff now home working will also be to think about the return of assets to site. Many staff will have taken screens, chairs, paperwork, and other non-system assets home to enable home working. These will all probably have to be returned, or if appropriate, disposed of, for example, with some paperwork assets, in a secure and controlled manner. Will this mean that each physical asset that is returned to site will need to be deep cleaned? How do you do that? What will be your policies and your practices? Next chart, please, Alice. Thank you. I wanted to briefly touch upon communication, so that there are now so many ways we can use to communicate in our organizations. Who would have thought the use of Zoom, Teams, WebEx, GoToWebinar would suddenly have become so prevalent? Building a communication plan, both internal and external, ensuring clarity with the expectations you're setting and how you are aligning with the guidelines from the various authorities. How will the plan be communicated? What media will be used? Intranet, internet, video, email, paper, telephone, all of these. How regularly will communication be updated? Stick to a schedule, make it public so that folk understand. Create certainty with your messaging. Can you provide your staff or visitors with an information pack before coming to or attending sites, such as a video of changed routing and entry procedures, or a virtual tour of the site showing the changes that have been made and where hand sanitizers are cited, for example? Using clear communication sets a clear example, reassures the team and can reflect the values your organization has, but it also allows you to set clear expectations. And as I mentioned earlier, it ties back to the ever greater sense of personal responsibility with hygiene tasks and distancing measures. So to touch a little bit upon facilities, next chart, please. I've already mentioned facilities, or areas that facilities touch on, a couple of times, such as the provision and location of hand sanitizers or the reworking of desk space or cleaning meeting rooms. There are a number of other areas to think through, and these are a few. So before re-entering, do you complete a deep clean of the location? And do you schedule additional cleaning activity over and above that which would normally be performed? If you do, for how long? With water tanks having potentially stood for some time and heating or air conditioner systems potentially idle, performing startup maintenance or accelerated maintenance activity would be prudent. The health and safety executive specifically highlights the risk of Legionella as we start re-entering buildings. So take a look at that guidance. I think it's really important. If you have generators or batteries at the location, checking these and performing routine maintenance or asking the management company to do so would be a prudent step to take at this time. If the power has been off, do you need to have it checked before flicking the switch? You may simply wish to accelerate or bring forward planned physical infrastructure maintenance activities. Do you need to deploy plexiglass partitioning in any areas? If you do, where do you acquire it from? How do you get it installed? But perhaps at a reception or in interview rooms. Do you create and signpost one-way systems around the site, indicate on flooring appropriate distancing levels using tape or paint? If you have lifts at the site, do you restrict their use? And how do you clean them? On what basis? What about evacuation of a location? Are there changes that need to be made? And have you thought about distancing when at an evacuation meeting area? Is that clearly communicated? I have discussed the supply and use of PPE already, but what about reversion should a hotspot outbreak occur in your town or county? How do you re-exit and then return again after? There should be at least a plan to react to the sine wave effect of infections occurring and reoccurring. You know, when's the second wave going to happen? Excuse me. Next chart, please, Alice. There will have been some interesting challenges for colleagues in the IT department or the CIO office over the last few months, I'm sure, and their resources and plans will have been, in many cases, stretched to the maximum. Same with our suppliers and colleagues in support businesses providing IT support. As we enter the interim and next new normals, there will be some actions and assessments that need to be quickly undertaken, but also decisions made with longer term implications. As with facilities, IT teams will need to ensure the safety and security of the workforce and the business assets, a deep clean, if you will. Ask, have all of the system patching and maintenance activities been carried out? And if not, how and when will they be? The risks to equipment that has not been made, both physically and logically secure, have heightened during these last few months. Has home working exposed the security of the organisation? Is there a need for specialist cyber review and testing? Do the alerting and capacity management mechanisms, policies, processes and procedures now need to be reviewed? Released today, the BitGlass 2020 remote work report shows some interesting statistics. It shows that many organisations are really struggling to adjust to remote working. A massive 41% say they've taken no action to expand secure access for their new remote workforce. And 84% of respondents say that they will continue to support remote working as the lockdowns ease. Worthy of note, in the same survey, of the respondents in that survey, 63% stated that remote working was likely to impact their compliance with regulatory measures, and 50% named GDPR specifically. Given the data held by this sector, is there a need to ensure that remote working security measures, securing data in any app, on any device, anywhere, should be seen as a priority? I think it should. What about data loss prevention actions? Do DR tests now need to be run and rerun? What about backup and restore policy management and tests? Do you know that it is working and still working? Tactical actions may have been taken to enable home or off-site working for staff. If this is to continue, does this affect endpoint and perimeter security? And is there a need for reviewed and revised policy and management action? Is there a new perimeter to your business? And the answer, I would guess, in this space is yes. As the economies reawaken and as the organisation moves into this next phase, will there be an increased or new demand on your technology, infrastructure, people and processes? And is there capacity to manage that demand? Thinking back to the discussion on workforce, do you now have the right skills at the level required to meet the capacity which will be demanded, not only to perform the tactical restart, maintenance and cleanup actions, but potentially also to meet demand for new projects and programs that might now be starting? And so before I wrap up, just a few comments related to the capacity of the organisation to manage change at a tactical level, but also, is there a need to take a strategic view? Next chart, please, Alice. Thank you. So whilst most of what's been discussed earlier touches upon tactical actions to think through or to take, I also believe that there are longer term activities which need to be considered. Organisations have rightly prioritised keeping employees and customers safe, even whilst facing serious cash flow, operational and supply issues. It is, however, also important to look beyond today and imagine what the next normal will look like. It's also true that the path to take to the next normal is uncertain and will differ by geography, country, company, sector, business and business function. How much will your organisation have changed during this crisis? What about its beneficiaries, customers, suppliers and workforce? What I think is clear is that an organisation which is planning ahead and looking at multiple scenarios is more likely to succeed and grow. At a very simple model level, the one here, using a 5S view can help an organisation develop scenarios and action plans to address those next steps. I've already mentioned scanning the horizon and building new scenarios for the organisation. In line with this, and as this stage of the crisis changes, are there activities, actions, programs and projects which can be stopped or pared back, slowed down in the model? Does this, for example, help with cash flow or help align the workforce to the demand for services that you have? What about activities that should be started? Are there new opportunities? Is there new demand? How do you access that new demand and build solutions or capacity for it? Are there contracts that need to be revisited, for example, with regards to buildings, or are there technology solutions that need to be addressed now that will support your new normal? And in this model, what about activities which should be accelerated? Do you double down in a particular area to deliver even greater benefit to your area of focus, your beneficiaries? Does the organization need to revisit its business plan in light of everything that's happened and in light of these comments? Bringing it a little closer to home, a real example. So as I mentioned earlier, as well as my role at Clearview, I'm on the board of trustees of a couple of charities. One has delivered its services to the community in a very traditional manner, face-to-face, with some telephone-based services. Due to this crisis and the lockdown, we've had to change the service dramatically. This time, there is no face-to-face in-person consultation. The team have moved everything to be delivered by telephone or technology, and demand has increased incredibly, as well as the demographic that is placing that demand has changed within the time frame in which we've made those changes. But interestingly, the ability to absorb the increased demand utilizing new ways of working has really been quite striking. So the team have had to stop some activities, start new ones, and speed up others, and are now asking, what does that service need to look like in the new normal? Scanning how to take the best of the old and combine it with the new. And so to my last slide, summary. Next slide, please. Thank you. Firstly, thank you for taking the time to listen today, and my thanks to the Cranfield Trust team for arranging the session. I hope that I have at least provided you with some areas to think about as we enter the next phase of this pandemic. Your business continuity plan should have been a valuable tool during the last few months, and if not, maybe now is a good time to perform an after-action review. Remember, one size does not fit all, although principles can be applied, and returning to normal operations really does depend on what that new normal looks like, and certainly top of mind will remain how to protect the workforce. And please remember my last comment, there is a significant amount of advice available from trusted sources. Please do continue to use those as you start reopening. And so I think I now hand back to Alice, and we'll try Q&A, I think. Alice. I think you're on mute, Alice.
Apologies. Thank you all. There's a lot of it for attending, and Steve, thank you so much for all the information. It's absolutely critical and of great value. Now, there's been a lot of questions, as you can imagine, coming through from this. So I am going to start off with a very easy one that came right at the beginning of the webinar. What do you mean by a sickness hero?
So in many organizations, many businesses, or culture within a lot of organizations, there's this view of, I've got a cold, I'll go to work. I feel a little bit poorly today, I'll just go into the office. The question I would ask is, in the current environment, with the pandemic and the way that we're all understanding how the transmission works, should we be encouraging that type of behavior, or should we be looking for actually the opposite? If you feel not great and your office is reopening, well, do the isolation piece. Think of both yourself and your colleagues, your friends and others. Don't be a sickness hero, I guess is the simple answer.
Yeah, that's very true. Somebody's just picked up on this last slide that's on the screen now. Continue your BC activity. BC, I presume, is before COVID activity.
No. Well, it can be,
No.
absolutely. Business continuity.
Our business continuity activity.
My
So
apologies.
what you were doing before and what you're going to do in the future towards the new normal. So business continuity activity. The next question I've got is, if a job can't be done at home and an employee refuses to come into the office, what is the employer's position?
I mean, I'm not a specialist in that area. I would refer to the advice and guidance that is available across the government websites, the union, the TUC website is really useful, and utilize that advice and guidance and work closely with the employee. I mean, I've seen an example with one of the charities that I've been working with where an employee had concerns about returning to work, and the discussion took place between the CEO and the employee, and they reached a sensible agreement. I think that's also part of the conversation here. There's the guidance, but there's also the sensible human-to-human conversation and discussion.
Thank you. I've got a charity that would be really interested to know if other charities will be running a thermometer or performing thermometer checks. So if I haven't got a poll, I can't set up a poll for that now, but if you all just say, yes, I'm running a thermometer check or not, then I'll collate the results at the end and I'll send those through. I'm going to read out some of these other questions. If international travel, oh, now everybody's answering about the thermometer. So we have 2 offices in a resource centre, which are on the 4th floor. Out of 7 members of staff, we are only asking 3 people to return that are in walking distance or drive. The social distancing would be more than adequate, but the staff are in an uproar and keep bringing it up that the government have said, if you can work from home, work from home. It's a little bit like your previous question. Answer.
Yeah, I think that there are going to be different phases as we exit the lockdown. There's going to be changing advice from the scientists, changing guidance from different governments, and we're seeing slightly different timescales dependent on where we live within the UK. I think that the guidance is there, and then the decisions that the organisations have to make ties to both the guidance, the laws within the land, and the discussions that take place with the workforce, but the risk assessments also that the organisation makes in terms of the return to work activity, the location itself, and that two-way discussion and conversation with the teams. I think that everybody is has their own experience as we've gone through the last couple of months, and that informs or otherwise your own personal feelings of how you think you can exit. And I think that conversation, that clear communication, clarity around the protections that are being put in place for the workforce, alignment to government guidance, to health, public health guidance and others, is the right way to make sure that the risk is minimized for the employees, that the benefits of the organization delivering services into the community are there and available. I mean, particularly in this sector, dealing with very many vulnerable people, having those services available is critical and crucial. But I think communication is part of the key answer, and understanding the risk, ensuring that the staff understand the risk, following the guidelines, and being as open and clear as possible. And everybody is going to be different. I think we all know that.
Yeah, and I guess that answer that you've given actually supports another question, which is, what if a CEO feels they're not getting enough support from their board of trustees, or in fact too much support?
Great question. I think it's communication. It's about leadership. For me, it would be about leadership, and be about communication, and be about understanding why that feeling was of not enough support or of too much support, and being able to have the discussion with the chair or with the board directly. I mean, one of the benefits I think that we've had over the last couple of months in terms of technology has been the ability for boards to get together using technology like Zoom or others, and have those meetings and those conversations with CEOs and staff if necessary. I think communication is critical.
Yeah, I agree. Communication is key during this period. Another organisation said that they don't have a written business continuity plan, and can a template be provided by the Cranfield Trust? Well, the Cranfield Trust can't provide you with a template. I think going back to the summary slide that we've got here, one size does not fit all, but Cranfield Trust can most definitely work with a charity to help them develop their business continuity plan. So we do have volunteers that can help with you and produce that. So do get in touch. There's somebody that says that they can't stay for the Q&A, but this was excellent. Thank you, Steve, and to Cranfield for this webinar. Somebody else has said we deliver sporting activities to young people. Is there guidance on this type of project?
Great question. I can't say that I specifically have seen that as I was doing the research prior to the webinar, but I would point to, depending on which country that charity happens to be in or operating across, I would point to the PHE, PHW, PHS, the public health websites, the NHS websites, and the governments in each of the countries. They are certainly outlining and highlighting the different guidelines for different activities and functions and organizations and sectors, and being pretty specific in a lot of areas. So that's where I would go to in the first instance to try and find some additional information.
Yeah, we've got some questions coming in which actually are perfect questions for the HR Net service that Jane spoke about earlier. So for example, if international travel becomes a possibility and we feel that everyone returning from holidays should be quarantined for 14 days, would we be obliged to pay them, or should it be taken as unpaid leave or sickness? Again, I'm not sure if that's a question for you, Steve, but it's definitely a question for our HR Net survey.
I think I'll defer on that one.
And we have a similar one, which is if an organisation is paying the additional 20% top-up pay for an employee on furlough, do we expect them to use their leave allowance month by month pro rata as a quid pro quo?
Yeah, again, I defer to the HR specialist, but I think that,
question.
Yeah, and there is guidance, and I mean it's fairly black and white if you go and look at some of the guidance that's available from the government websites. And I do also think that there's a conversation piece there between the employee and employer, the staff in the organisation to work through some of those quite difficult questions. But it almost refers back to the communication piece, Alice, I think.
Yes, it does. And there's somebody that said that they operate from a community building. How can they open up again, and how can they guarantee hygiene levels? Because they are actually a guest tenant in a community, in a wider environment, community building.
I think I tried to touch upon that a little bit in the previous section, where you are either operating as a tenant within a broader, wider scale building, or in this case a community building. I think that it really comes down to that organisation having its own risk assessment and understanding of what its needs and risk management policies and procedures are going to be for its staff and its activity, but then also opening up a conversation with either the management company or I guess there would be a community board that would operate that type of facility, and opening that conversation and having working through an agreement process where everybody's risk management profile is being understood and taken account of. I think, surprisingly, it's a communication thing, but ties to understanding your organization risk profile and how you want to operate, and then taking that into that conversation.
Yeah. Thank you. There's a question here saying, can PPE be washed and reused? I guess that is specific to the type of PPE that is in question, and the guidance from the manufacturers of that PPE?
I would guess so. There's also quite a lot of information on PPE on the government websites and the health board websites, but also on the WHO website. There's some great assets, context, and content that is available there. And I would recommend anybody who's thinking about going down that path that they do exactly as you've just mentioned, Alice, but also refer to those other trusted sources.
Yeah, and on the same kind of ilk, there's a question here saying that they run a play centre for children with special educational needs, and many are vulnerable and have low immunity. We plan to run by invite to a limited amount of members in any session. How do we provide a safe environment with children that cannot socially distance and it's impossible to sanitise all the toys?
Crikey. What a tough question, and obviously something that is crucial for the children as well. Again, I think that in this instance I would have to defer to the health guidelines from the public health bodies in England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. There is a lot of information that is available there in relation to how organisations should account for hygiene in as many circumstances as they've described. But I think it comes down to a couple of things as well. One is, what is your risk profile? What does your risk assessment say? What is the guidelines, and what is the advice from your country government, UK government, from the public health authorities within your region, and any other regulatory body that you may be part of? And if you are able to therefore make an assessment in terms of your risk, to articulate that for the staff and the children and the broader community, and then have the discussion with those people who are looking to take part in the services. I think that having that open conversation says, look, we can manage our risk to this point, but thereafter it may be more difficult to do so, and everybody needs to understand that that's the case. And then it comes down to the level of risk that both the individual, the organisation wants to take, but also what's allowable under the rules and guidelines from the governments and health authorities.
Thank you. That's a very comprehensive answer, and I'm sure will be very helpful for many people on this call. We have a question. I know that there are some funders on this call, and I also know that some funders have requested a recording of this session. So this is a question for funders. What additional costs are there for charities? Well, what additional funding is available to cover the additional costs for PPE and for protecting the premises? And that isn't really a question for you, Steve, but it is a question for our funders. And I know that there are lots of funders offering emergency funding, and I'm sure that some of that will cover this. But we will put that question out to our funders, and whatever comprehensive responses we have on that, we will share those in the follow-up emails. And talking about follow-up emails, we will be sending a recording, as I said at the beginning, with the slides, with additional information, and some of the answers to these questions. Now, we've got a lot more questions coming through, but I think our time has run out now. It is now 10 minutes past 12, so we won't be able to cover those. But what I can ask from you all is that at the end of this webinar, there will be a survey. Please do respond to that survey. Also, please feel free to email us anything that hasn't been answered. We will do our best to try and answer that in a follow-up slide or something like this. But I would like to thank you, Steve, for this work. And also, I was really impressed that you have been online this morning and updating information with new links and new surveys that have come out and information, because it's an ever-changing road and environment. I'm just going to flick to the next slide, which indeed has some useful links, so these will be shared with you. And finally, the Cranfield Trust are here to help organisation. So please don't be shy. Please do contact us, and we will do our best to either signpost, provide help ourselves, or even just provide somebody to chat with you. So I would like to say one more time, thank you so much, Steve. This has been a really valuable session. We will get back to everybody. I apologise if we can't address every Q&A. We're finishing this webinar with 300 people on the call, having had nearly 450 people on this call today. So thank you all very much. We will be sharing the recording and we will be in touch. So Steve, once again, there are plenty of thank yous coming through from the participants in this call. Please, everybody, stay safe. It's very difficult for most people. Don't rush into things that you don't need to rush into. Plan, contact us for support, and good luck. Thank you very much. Goodbye.